Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros Podcast. My name's Jeremy. Welcome if it's your first time, and I'm joined again today by my lovely friend and co-host, Ilan. How are you going, mate?
I'm good, mate. You actually stuck with me. So that whole emphasis on me joining you again, it's going to keep happening till the end of time.
23 episodes in, and we're sticking fat.
Exactly. How have you been?
No, I've been well, mate. I've been well. Excited for this episode. As you guys can see, it's bit more of a serious one, I guess, today. Discussing bullying, something that we can all resonate with to some extent. Might have all been affected by it to some extent, or maybe we've been the bullies ourselves. Perhaps, who knows? We will talk about it and we will get to the bottom of it. But yeah, a prevalent topic, one that I think will always be spoken about for years to come. And it's something that isn't just prevalent in our younger years in school, in universities. It's something that can carry through to workplaces as well. So yeah, we're keen to discuss all things bullying, the good, the bad, the ugly, if there even is any good. And yeah.
Well, I mean, just to foreshadow what's to come, we'll explain some of the reasons, evolutionary reasons why bullying does exist, some of our personal experiences with it, and maybe, I wouldn't say it's a controversial view that we have, but we'll get to that. And it's just in relation to how I think schools and society views bullying. So that's all to come. And yeah, so first thing I'll do is I'll just quickly I'll define our terms. What is a bully?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's important to define our terms to start with, isn't it? So yeah, what is a bully? We've found this definition. Now it says a bully is someone who uses their strength and influence to intimidate or harm a weaker person. And this can be psychological or it can be physical. Now I actually looked at this and I thought, interesting. It's saying a bully is someone who uses strength and influence. Strength is the word that stuck out to me there in that definition, because from my experiences, I was thinking, look, I don't know if bullies are always strong, and what does strength even mean in a case like this? Is it physical strength? Is it like a manipulation type of strength? What do you reckon?
I think it could be both, but I think when it comes to the whole idea of strength, what it would mean in this context is that they have some sort of power over you. So it doesn't necessarily need to be physical, because as you said, when we do think of strength, we think of maybe someone who's physically domineering, but that could also be psychological. How are they using their words? How are they communicating to you? Because there's strength in your tone of voice as well. You can be really certain, dominant in how you speak, or you can be a bit lighter. You can ask questions and end it with, a higher tone. So I mean, the whole thing here about strength, it's also, but for me, what stuck out was influence, because bullies tend to have a lot of influence. They can get peers to kind of egg the victim, rather to egg the victim on. So there's always that kind of interesting thing behind it, but it's not just physical, it can be psychological as well.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes the psychological impacts can last a bit longer than just, the bruise from a physical battering.
If not forever.
It can. And look, there's a few studies here that have actually pointed to that, which is research suggests that children and youth who are exposed to bullying over time, and the crucial point here is over time, are more likely than those who are not bullied to experience depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. And they're more like, and this one's a bit of an obvious one, but they're just more likely to be lonely and want to avoid school. And the thing with this kind of whole statement is that if you let bullying happen over, a few years, even a few weeks, a few years, the consequences, they can really, really, really sour, or rather lower your self-esteem. And I think as humans, one of our best superpowers is being able to build up our self-esteem. And I think that bullying just shuts that out. And I think there's a lot of different reasons why people get bullied, and we'll get into that. But it's usually you find targets who are different.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of motivators why people bully. So
yeah. One thing you said there is that letting bullying happen to you for a long period of time can dampen your self-esteem. The word I'm going to kind of be critical of what you said there is let bullying happen to you. What do you mean by letting bullying happen to you? Because often...
Well, you are nitpicking here, so
I am
maybe
nitpicking.
rephrase it.
I am nitpicking because it's a tough one.
I think there's going to be circumstances where you can't control the bullying, but ultimately you can control your reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't necessarily always, control your circumstances and how people speak to you, but what you can control is how you respond to them
Yeah.
and what you do about it. If you're in school, that could mean, telling a teacher. That might mean fighting back, and we'll get into, some of our personal views with it.
Yeah.
But the whole thing about letting it happen is no one wants bullying to happen. No school is happy for students to get bullied. In workplace scenarios, no person who's directing a workplace is happy with, workplace bullying. But something that you and I did speak about is the fact that for as many efforts as there are to kind of get rid of bullying, it's something that's just kind of stuck on throughout throughout history.
Yeah.
And it begs the question, why? Because, if it's such a heinous thing, why isn't it something that's just been stamped out?
Well, I think it comes back down to what we spoke about previously, just, off air, about the evolutionary psychology behind bullying, and that being like, there's generally a pecking order, there's hierarchy, there's status, and the people who are at the top of the pecking order, they're the ones that are, gathering all the food, gathering all the crops, the partners, like they're the ones that are in those positions of power, right? Those high positions of power. And then you've got down the bottom of the pecking order and the bottom of the hierarchy chain are, the people beneath them, and they might see those people as, essentially beneath them, and therefore use them as an easy target to bully them or to threaten them. And I think the threatening part of it is to enable that person at the bottom of the pecking order to realize that this person who is bullying them is above them, and they should therefore, I don't know, kind of see them in a different light, perhaps. That superiority about them, that aura about them. It's like, you don't want to mess with me. I'm above you. Know your place. Stay in your lane.
What you've described there is just everything that goes on in the animal kingdom. If you ever watch those Nat Geo wildlife videos, and
100%.
Rather, what you'll see is, you'll see the alpha lion, physically domineering maybe the potential other cubs who are, threatening his title and his status as the alpha lion, right? Because in a lot of ways, there's benefits to being that. You have free access to mating opportunities in the animal kingdom. You have a lot of food. Everyone's going to respect you unless someone else kind of challenges you for it. But something else you mentioned there, which is the whole intimidation tactic, is that people use intimidation tactics when they're bullying because, as you just said, it reinforces that whole kind of hierarchy. I mean, people get bullied for different reasons, but I suppose the motivation is all true in that they just want to reinforce that I'm above you and you're beneath me. Know your place, know your lane. Don't try and challenge me because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that you mentioned that about, the person above bullying that person who is beneath them, whether that be physically beneath them or in some other way beneath them. But I'm going to nitpick that, physical, the physical element of the bullying, because, when you are in primary school, and I know from my experiences, it is often like the bigger kids, the bigger kids that will pick on the smaller kids. So it does have that physical element to it, that body size element to it. You very rarely hear of the little pipsqueak in the classroom picking on the kid that's bigger than them. It's always the other way around, isn't it?
That's how you see it, at least in those movies, right? And what you're actually seeing there is mostly how guys tend to bully each other, because boys and girls are both victims of bullying, but they can also be the perpetrators of it.
Yeah.
And men will tend to use more physical violence and more kind of physical means to kind of stamp their authority and dominance, whereas girls tend to bully other people indirectly or by using kind of relational aggression. So that could just be verbal assaults, could be organizing rumors and gossiping, and essentially just ostracizing the intended victim through pure kind of linguistics, right?
Yeah.
Spreading a really nasty rumor about someone, even if it's not true.
Yeah.
And then you get, it's the same sort of influence that you would see with maybe physical bullying, but it's just a different different vehicle for it.
I would argue that the way of bullying in terms of spreading rumors, gossiping, ostracizing, all of that, whether that be, female dominant, male dominant, whatever, I would argue that that is probably the more hurtful way of bullying than physical bullying.
I couldn't agree more with you, because there's been times that even when I was younger, I'd get up like into a little, I won't call it a punch up, because when you're like bloody 7, 8 years old, 9, 10 years old, little, scratch here and there, you think they're an MMA cage fighter. But I mean, anytime I did experience that with someone, I always found that I became like really good friends with them. I think guys have this impeccable ability of having a fight and then going out for a beer after. There's always, I've seen like these jokes and TikToks about it. Like, guys will hate each other. We will literally bash each other. We will say the most heinous, disgusting things to one another. And it's a kind of our way of showing love. Separate from bullying.
In a way.
No, separate from bullying. This is like forget bullying for a second.
That's like the banter side of it.
Yeah, like
maybe.
even our group chats, we love giving shit to one another, but it's done from love, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's different. That's boys will be boys at the end of the day.
That just shows how it kind of leaks into our kind of, when people do choose to bully, especially guys, they will use more kind of physical violence, because that's kind of like, for us, we could use verbal aggression, but usually if we're using verbal aggression, it could oftentimes even be interpreted as banter. But that's just something to note.
Funny we mentioned that though, because when I think of my experiences with bullying, when I was in school, I don't think I was a victim. Well, I know I wasn't really a victim of like physical bullying, physical violence towards me. That's just my perspective. Mine was, the other form of bullying that we spoke about, the spreading rumors, the gossiping, the ostracizing. Those were the ones that really got me. So yeah, it is funny that we tend to say that men choose violence more so. Maybe it's just the community that I was in. I didn't really see much of the physical violence for bullying.
Well, sorry to interject, but probably the fact that you would say that is because the studies that they've done are on school-age children. You won't really see kind of physical altercations in a workplace. I feel like at that point...
No, I'm talking about when I was school age.
So no, I know, but I'm saying... Well, first of all, the way kind of studies will work is this is from the plethora of studies that they've collected, it would say in general. So in general, boys will tend to use more physical violence.
Of course, yeah.
Girls will use more of the verbal aggression. But what I'm trying to say as well is that as you kind of get a little bit older, you're not going to get physical. It's rare. I'm sure it happens, but I'm sure there's cases of, physical bullying at workplaces. Because that's the thing about bullying. It doesn't necessarily end after you finish school. It can go on throughout a lifetime. You can get bullied by listening to that passive aggressive manager at work, who's ripping on you, and you think, well, are they bullying me or are they just a bitch? So there's obviously those kind of cases as well.
Of course.
Do you think that though nowadays we throw around the term bullying like way too much? So like, for example, if I said to you, Jeremy, that I wasn't really happy with how you behaved, for example, to a group of friends last night, and I called you out on the group and I criticized your behavior. Do you think that if, for example, people are using situations like that where they get valid criticism and then they throw the word bullying, do you think that's something that's been overused?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I definitely do think it's a word that is overused. I mean, bullying is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I mean, just because I hate seeing people get bullied, and I hated receiving it as well. But yeah, I think it is definitely a word that's thrown around all too much, especially with blokes. I mean, because a lot of the time we might just be bantering, but I think sometimes it's important to clarify what is the banter. And if someone is actually getting hurt by the banter, in quotation marks, then it isn't banter. It's clearly cutting something a little bit deeper. It might turn to something a little bit more personal, and that's where it oversteps the line, and it's probably no longer banter. It probably is bullying. But I think clarifying what it is that you're talking about amongst the group, what it is you're talking about, even in one-on-one conversation with the person, can give you more of an indication as to, whether this is joking around or not, or whether it is something a little bit more sinister. And often I think you'd be able to gauge that based on how the person is receiving it. If they're laughing it off, if they're giving it back to you in a way, I think you can safely say that it is just a little bit of playful teasing and banter. But if one party is probably taking a little bit more, taking it to heart, or they're a little bit upset and hurt by it, that's probably stemming along the lines of bullying, but I think bullying also is something that might happen repeatedly. I think that's a nice little way to differentiate. I think bullying is maybe not a once-off thing. I mean, it can be, depending on, I guess, the severity of it. But being rude maybe once off, I wouldn't necessarily call that bullying.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's probably a really good way to differentiate.
Like repeat offense.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing about banter there is very crucial as well, because there'll be times, I think, as blokes, we're very, very good at crossing the line. But the difference is when you've crossed the line, are you willing to acknowledge it and say, hey, shit, like my bad, didn't mean to hurt you. You know, it was coming from a place of
100%.
Friendship, love and whatnot. But I think there's another aspect to it, which is the whole idea of ridicule.
Yeah.
Because if you're getting publicly ridiculed in certain situations, and as you said, if it's happening over time, then chances are you could classify it as bullying. But irrespective, if you're not happy with how you're being treated, and you do feel like you're being bullied, you do have control. And that's kind of the next point I wanted to speak about, is kind of our own personal experiences with bullying.
For sure. So, I mean, yeah, you mentioned that you were bullied. So what were your experiences with it, and how did you instill that level of control?
I can't say that I was, vehemently bullied for like a year and a half. I can't say that I was bullied to the point of where I wanted to move schools or anything like that. But there was a point in year 8 where I struggled a lot with friendships. I probably had maybe 1 or 2 good friends, and there were a few people in my year level who would ridicule me here and there. And at the start, what my mum would tell me is just ignore it.
It's often the common phrase, isn't it?
In the sense that ignore it. If it's not in your face every second of the day, don't let it.
Oh, no, I'm just
be
laughing
trapped in your mind.
because that's often what I got told as well. And when you are in year 7, year 8, year 9, just hearing ignore it is probably the worst couple of words you could hear.
And it's for me as well. It was like I was never going to go to teachers about it, because maybe it was just a form of arrogance that I had when I was like 14, going through puberty. I was like, nah, I was pretty shitty. So I was like, I'm going to sort it out myself. Yeah. And I'm not saying that was a smart thing to do, but there would be times where I would get ridiculed. I would ignore it. But I think the turning point for me was my ability to recognize I'm not going to take shit from people. And as I said, whether it was arrogance, whether it was this or that, I'm not sure. But I was really, really unhappy with how I was being treated by kind of certain people kind of in my year level at school. So I thought, you know what? Enough is enough. Like, I'm not going to go to a teacher about this. And this is not a dig at teachers. This is not a dig at schools, because they do want to keep their students safe. But at the same time, as a teenager, you're going through puberty. You are concerned about your reputation, especially as a guy.
100%.
You're not going to want to go and be known as that kid who went to their teachers and told off and said, oh, this person abused me in a public WhatsApp group. And look, I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. I'd say, like, if it gets to that point, by all means, you do that. But for me at the time, my biggest emphasis was, let me give shit back. If someone's going to hurt, like, if someone's going to punch me, I'll punch them back. Right? And that was kind of my turning point with it. It was because there's a huge thing here about respect. People will bully others if they don't respect them, or if they have limited respect for them. If I was to fight back, they might not like me, but they would at least have more respect for me, because they're like, oh shit, at least he can hold his own. He's not as easy of a target. Shit, if he can fight back and maybe to the same ability as me, whether it's verbally, physically, and I'm speaking more just generally here, then what's not stopping them from, humiliating me? So then those bullies will tend to just take a step back.
They get a bit of an ego hit themselves.
And they might like you. In anything, they might, especially with guys, as we said, we joked around earlier, but there is merit to it. You can have a punch up with someone that you hate, and then you're like, you know what? Great scrap. We got it all out. Let's be mates now. I respect you, or you respect me,
Yeah, it's that battle between the egos that I think you often see in guys. And I think, if, one guy is giving it back, giving it to someone, and then they cop it back, it's an ego hit at the end of the day. So it's a bit of ego tennis. And I think, like you said, it's warranted. But it is hard, because sometimes not sometimes, always in school, we're told that 2 wrongs don't make a right. Isn't that right? It's the old cliche.
Oh, it depends. It so depends though. Like,
it does depend.
Sometimes, and I got a detention for this. Like, I'm not going to say what happened. I think my friends will listen and probably know what I'm speaking about. But, I once got a detention for taking things into my own hands.
Right. Quite literally.
Yeah. I wasn't like.
See, guys, so Ilan was actually the bully.
No.
No, I'm joking.
I think at that time, it's like one of those, you've got so many social dynamic changes going on. You're losing friends, you're gaining friends. And in my case, I felt like there were people who were turning, my friends against me. And that's the whole thing of influence. And I felt like I had again, ego tennis came into play. I was like, I'm not going to let this happen. So I thought, I'll take it into my own hands. I got a detention. I didn't tell my mum. And then my mum was like to me, why did I get a call from the school today? And I explained everything that happened. And, funnily enough, she wasn't even upset at me. She just said, do that, but at least tell me first.
Yeah.
And I was like kind of relieved. But my whole thing was just, it's easy for me to say there wasn't violence or anything like that. But, and someone who was, vehemently bullied and, physically, they might listen to me and think, oh, you're a flog. You didn't actually experience maybe the same bullying that I did.
It's all contextual, isn't it?
It's contextual, and I get that. But I still am quite stubborn on the point that if you show some sort of fight and you show self-respect for yourself, you're also doing something else, which is something we touched on earlier, which is you're going to build up your self-esteem.
Yeah.
And self-esteem is one of the biggest either risk factors or predictors of your overall mental health. If you've got really, really good self-esteem, then chances are you're less likely to develop things like depression, anxiety, because self-esteem correlates also with your self-love. And that was, I think, when we talk about formative, fuck me, that was a very, very formative period of time for me, because what happened a year after was, whether it was the energy thing or not, I had a lot of good friends that, I gained through this period, because maybe they would have, maybe a smaller sheer level that I had, they would have seen, okay, Ilan, stood up to people. I think on a subconscious level, I could be wrong, but you could, you respect people who stand up for themselves, because, you might think they can bring out the best in you. So that's kind of my experience with it, and I'll draw on another lesson after your thing, but that was kind of what I learned from it. I can go on a whole rant here, mate.
I can tell, mate. I feel like, that's a fair rant, but it's a warranted rant, and I actually really love that point. It's not a point that you often hear. Like, people might have expected us to sit here and say, like, you know what, if you've been bullied or whatever, you should just like confide in those around you, tell people about it, get support.
Which you should.
Of course, like, there's a time and place for that, and we are still advocating for that. We're advocating for, getting support from your loved ones and your friends and your family and all of that. But I think it's really important to raise that point that, fight back. Like, have some, strength about you. Self-love, self-worth, and give it back. If someone's trying to beat you down to that ground, don't cop it. Don't let them, get away with that, because that's the ultimate form of humiliation for yourself, I think, as well, is letting that happen to you. And I think that's what we mean by letting it. It was that nitpicking word, but you can only let something happen to you for so long.
Yeah, and I completely agree that I like this saying, which is, you will put up with what you tolerate. And if you're tolerating that, it could be look, it might not be your fault. It probably isn't your fault. Oftentimes people who are getting bullied haven't done anything wrong. But the problem is, it is now your responsibility. Yeah. And the reason we haven't taken, some might have looked at this podcast episode and thought, okay, great, they're going to start speaking about, if you see bullying, stamp it out, do this, the bare basic information, what schools can do, what, the typical kind of workshops you would get in school. But that's not our approach. I'm not saying those things are wrong either, but at least and the reason I'm a little bit passionate about this is because I think nowadays we're devoting all of our resources in the similar way that, governments, deployed resources on the war on drugs. It's an unwinnable war. bullying has always been there, and unfortunately it will continue to be there. So I think our approach is different. Our approach is, let's focus on the individual level. How can we foster a sense of resilience, strength, and courage, and a lot of self-love within a person for it to not happen? That doesn't mean that they can't rely on support, and it also doesn't mean that they can't seek advice from others or tell the school. Contextual information is important. You don't know what's going on, but there is no harm in you fighting back, even if you do get the detention.
I love that.
Even if you go I'm not saying you go instigate. You only respond. Our judicial system only punishes people who are perpetrators of violence, or rather than those defending themselves. But if you get in trouble because you beat the shit out of that kid who was bullying you, wear it with pride.
Yeah, again, I love that point. I mean, I think we've confirmed that we aren't condoning violence here, but we are condoning to stand up for yourself and to have that self-defense. And I think that's a really important point, because I think that it's just a nice overall message of overcoming rather than trying to avoid, because like you said, it's always going to be there. Yeah.
My experience is very different from yours. And there were times you mentioned to me as well that you wanted to leave school. Did you ever at any point look at that and think, like, would that just be giving up? Because for example, you could go to another school and the same bullying would happen. Yeah,
100%. And this is something that I have mentioned in previous episodes too. And I think you're exactly right. Like, I reached that stage year 8, year 9 as well, getting bullied. Mine was, again, like I mentioned before, it was the form of bullying of spreading rumors, ostracism, just general teasing, but to the extent of it being so repetitive that it was bullying, right? And I would come home and it would continue over text messages, and you would absolutely dread coming to school the next day, because you come to school, you're getting whacked with bullying. You go home, you're getting whacked with bullying. And I reached the point where I was highly considering leaving school, like chats with my principal and everything like that. But then, credit to my principal at the time, and mad respect to him for how he managed it for me, was, he basically told me, just stick it out. Like, stick it out. This happens. It's part of, the pubescent years. It'll happen. But, he instilled that confidence in me at the time. He told me to back myself. He said, you're a person in your year level, in your school, with, great mates around you, which is a massive tick. It wasn't like I was lonely at the time. And I do understand that a lot of people cop bullying and they're very lonely. They might not have friends in school. I was one of the lucky ones. I had a lot of good quality friends around me. So he told me to back that in. He told me to back in that I, had some good qualities about myself, whether it was, academically, leadership qualities too. And he basically just boosted my self-esteem and made me realize what I have kind of going for myself, rather than focusing on the negatives of the situation, right? And that was really powerful, especially at the age of 14, 15, because like you said, oftentimes we're told to just ignore it. Your parents are telling you, just ignore it, don't listen to it, as if it's just all going to go away overnight. That never bloody happens. And that's the worst thing that I got told at the time, is to just ignore it. It was really powerful to hear that you have someone in your corner who is backing you. And this is, because your parents are always going to back you, you'd hope. They're always going to, instill that love in you. I was really lucky to get that from my parents, and they're always going to be in your corner. But to get it from someone external, like in the school, and not just a teacher, because teachers can sometimes, say that they're going to act in a certain way. They're going to talk to students or whatever. Does it happen? Maybe. Does it solve anything? Not really. But, the principal told me that, like, just back yourself in and give things a go and stick it out. And that was really good, because it wasn't like an overnight approach. He told me that, this will probably continue. It's not going to just go away overnight. But eventually your character will shine through. And I think that's the best way to see bullying through, is to know the person you are and to know the values that you've got, confide in those around you, and ultimately you'll see it through. And hearing that, wasn't going to just be an overnight fix was important. And that's tough to hear as a 13, 14-year-old who is copying it and is hating school and is hating getting up in the morning to go to school. Bloody tough thing to hear. But it's also a bit of a reality check. It's a little bit of tough love. So yeah, that was my experience with it, and forever indebted to my principal at the time, because it was just a really wise approach to it. Thinking back on reflecting on it now, at the time I bloody hated it. Like at the time I was thinking, like, are you kidding? Like I've just sat here and you're basically telling me to just like tough it out. But in hindsight, looking back on it now, I think it's so powerful.
I think there's value in toughing it out. I think now with the trend in society, which is, I don't want to make like a bold statement and say now men are told to completely just discard the whole toughen up thing. But I think we're now at like an interesting point now where our messaging that we receive about how we express emotions is very kind of interesting, in that some can just interpret it as men shouldn't have to tough it out. They just let it all out. But for boys and girls, it doesn't matter. You need to have mental resilience.
It's a marriage of the two.
It's a marriage of the two, and you can be emotional, but you also need to have resilience. There's no problems being emotional, letting yourself cry, letting yourself come to terms with how you're feeling.
Sure. Mate, I fucking cried. I can tell you that.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But and I said it on the breakup episode, the fire in the belly. What do we do with energy? It can't be created nor destroyed, so you have to transform it into something.
You do.
And in those bullying stages, in those, as you said, the adolescent years, the best thing you can do is use that energy and firepower into developing your own, self-esteem. Do you know how many kids I see at gym now? Like, 14, 15-year-old kids. I don't know whether, there's a heap of reasons I'm sure kids go to gym. All right, but I remember when I started, I wasn't that young, and I look at some kids and I think, first of all, good on them. They're trying to better themselves. But then, I always start thinking also, like, are they doing this because, they want to get a little bit more physical mass, so they're not as easy of a target. And I think if that's the case, and if that's purely their sole motivator for going to the gym, I have nothing but respect for them, honestly, because I think that is a really, really important lesson, is that you can't just put short-term fixes. That moving schools might not solve the problem, right?
And likely you're just going to probably cop it again, right? You're going to, you might be that new kid. And look.
Do you know why though? People can sense weakness. And I'm not saying weakness in a really derogatory way. What I mean there is people can sense when someone is willing to tolerate shit from others. Yeah. Unearned shit, right? So
it's just I think it's just a band-aid approach. It's just a band-aid approach to just, you're obviously in a vulnerable situation. Let's just completely isolate myself from it and plonk myself in a new situation and hope it all dissipates. The trauma is still there. So are you gonna overcome that trauma? Are you gonna see it through, or tough it out, or not even tough it out, but try to look for a way to better yourself through it and become a bigger person through it? Or are you just kind of band-aid approach it? And that goes for anything in life, but especially with bullying in school, I think that's also a very relevant way to look at it.
I love that. And it's good because it just kind of goes back to the whole thing of reinforcing, if you do move schools and someone's saying that you'll tolerate shit, they'll know, and whether we like to admit it or not, they'll see where you are in this sort of, social hierarchy. So that's, I think, the importance of just having that self-love and wherewithal to say, I'm not going to tolerate this. And quickly, just before because I want to ask you about, your experiences and when you were a camp counselor and how you saw bullying. But just before that, we mentioned as well that bullying isn't something that's just going to go away. But when you're in workplaces, or even when you're a bit older, what are some of the ways that you could address it? Because let's not get violent is the first one. We're not prescribing that, by the way.
No,
unless someone's hurting you, like self-defense for sure. But our whole point here is, if you're getting, ridiculed in a workplace or someone's not speaking to you well, what do you think are the best approaches for that? Because some of our listeners may have finished school, they're working a part-time job. There might be some, some unfavorable individuals who are working with them. It could even be their boss or their manager or whatever. Well, how do you go from identifying the bullying to getting rid of it?
Yeah, well, like a school's got their teachers, their principals, and all of that. So too do workplaces have, like, HR and things like that, where you can go to people and talk with them and discuss what's going on. So obviously those resources are there. So it's important to still recognize that resources are there for you to go and discuss any matter that might be causing some level of upsetness, or that's not even a word, but some level of despair towards you. So recognizing those resources and utilizing them is important. But I think if we want to look at the individual level, like what is happening if you yourself are copying something and it's not sitting well with you, your boss is tearing you down repeatedly and it's not getting better, I think kind of like just doing the bare minimum in terms of your interaction with that person. I think sometimes it's hard in a workplace to just fight back and have a little bit of stick about you and give it back to them, because if they're your boss, like, they're kind of in charge of your position there. And if you want to stay in that workplace and you want that position, it puts you in a bit of a difficult situation. So if this is the type of person where you're interacting with them quite regularly, I'd say all you can do is focus on yourself. Focus on how you interact with that person. Give them no reason to bully you in a way or to find something to nitpick against you. And I'm not saying like be an angel of an employee and make sure you're working overtime and getting everything into a T by like due dates. But like, if it's a type of workplace where like you're handing in reports or handing in like assignments or whatever it might be, and they're constantly finding something, I think there's just some beauty in just copying it on the chin, just saying thanks and moving on.
Yeah, I get what you mean. The whole thing about criticism and bullying, they're two separate things. And, we don't want to kind of purport this message.
But I think in workplaces, they can kind of tie in together.
Well, I mean, if they're ridiculing you, well, I'll give you a really blatant one. Let's say you're doing a job for your boss or whatever, and they're saying, okay, you can't do anything right. You're pathetic. You're useless. Like, do this again. That's way different from, hey, like, I like what you did there, but this isn't quite right. Can you do this instead? Which one sounds like the bullying? The first one,
The
right?
first one, obviously. And it's those cases where I would encourage a person to go to HR and to raise that level of concern, because...
Do you not see benefit, though, from the person also just saying, hey, look, I'm all for you giving me criticism and feedback, but what you've said there, I'm not going to tolerate. It's not nice. It's rude. It's disrespectful. You can tell me what I've done wrong without having to shame me and ridicule me.
For sure.
Because I think even if they are your boss and they do have that power over you, like, you still got to... like, no job should come at the expense of your self-love.
For sure.
And your self-respect. Sure. And yeah, I agree. You do go to HR, you go to the resources and places and things that can help you. But I'm still kind of sticking fat with that whole philosophy of be clever. Just be and be calm. Don't scream at them,
Be calm.
Imagine publicly you get into an argument with them and they're screaming, but you're really calm and composed.
Oh, I'd piss them off that much.
Piss them off. And if you want the public on your side, they'll love the person who's cool, calm, and collected.
For sure. No, I think there's a lot of merit in that. Obviously, sticking up for yourself and saying, I'm not going to tolerate that. Saying it in a cool, polite way, of course. But yeah, also then recognizing that there are resources for you to talk to if it is intensifying and getting worse. Because the fact of the matter is, it probably can, and workplace bullying is a thing as well. So there's only so much a person can take in a workplace when they're ultimately getting paid by certain people. So yeah, it's a different rope to walk on versus in school.
Tell me, you were a camp counselor when you were 19 on your gap year in the US.
I was, yeah.
You had a bit of a position and responsibility over looking after kids, and bullying's going to happen. So what do you do in those circumstances as a camp counselor?
Probably the most growth I've ever felt in myself as a as to who I was in terms of how I could manage situations both with myself and with others. It was my first time properly working with kids, and you're exactly right, mate. You see it. I saw it quite often, unfortunately, but the way in which I tried to go about it was different to how I felt like people went about it with me when I was younger. My mentors went about it with me when I was younger, like in school. So often what I would do is like if I saw a kid being bullied and like I actually saw it, say it was within a group, I would like call it out and ask like, what's going on here? Like, why'd you say that, mate? And because like I was like, you know, their camp leader, they don't want to like, they don't want to, they don't want me to dislike them. Like you want to be liked by your mentors. You want to be liked by your leaders. So it doesn't matter if I was talking to the bully or the person being bullied. They all want love. They all want to be liked by their mentors. So if I was in a situation where I'd see it, I'd ask, like, I'll just question it. I'd be like, why'd you say that, mate? Like, what are you getting out of that? And oftentimes they've got nothing to say, and you see them go into a shell, and then they feel shit about it themselves. And look, it's not like it wouldn't come up again. Like, it would definitely come up again. But the more I saw it, the more I would make an active effort to call it out, and not to call it out in a way where I'm like saying, don't say that, that's not on, go to the naughty corner. I would more so question it. And I think questioning has a really deep power, even for, you know, little tackers. Like these kids were 12 years old, because it's a moment of reflection for them, and they have to sit there and think, why did I say that? You know, and if they came back and said like some smart ass thing, it was often like, it was often just going to make them look and feel more stupid as well. So half the time when you're questioning it, they're just going to sit there or stand there in silence because they're embarrassed. So that was one key tactic I used, and I found it worked. Another key tactic was like, if it was more of like a personal situation, like a kid came up to me and like told me that they were getting bullied by a certain kid or whatever, I would talk to both of them privately, firstly, but I wouldn't grill either one of them. So like the bully, I wouldn't even grill the bully and roast them and say like, why'd you say this? What are you doing? That's not on. You can't say this. I would again question, but in a private scenario. So just ask like, why'd you say that? Is anything on your mind? Do you feel like you've been, you know, hurt in a certain way maybe? Because sometimes maybe that kid, that bully, maybe that something's gone on at home, right? Maybe they've got a certain insecurity about them where they're struggling, and, you know, their form of taking it out at that age is by projecting it onto a more vulnerable target. So sometimes it's not all black and white. Like it's not always, you know, the bully is the bad kid. Because I truly believe that none of these kids were bad. And this kid in particular that I'm referring to, he often had a bad rap at the camp that I was at. Like he was known as the kid that was the bully essentially, or the person that would disobey things. And I made it my challenge to kind of make this kid my own and make him feel just as loved as everyone else, and get an experience out of camp like he's probably never had. Because imagine being that person who is constantly othered, you know, constantly marginalized from the group. And that kid who is often marginalized, why would they then want to turn around and act all goody two shoes? You know, they're the one who's constantly copped all the crap from everyone else in the group. It's only going to egg them on to continue doing that, right? So I tried to just really take a personal approach, get that kid on my side by giving him a voice essentially. You know, if you give someone a voice, you can often learn a lot about them, cut deep into like certain vulnerabilities. And I can guarantee you, like at the start, it was hard to kind of draw things out of him and hear what he had to say, because who am I for him to trust? You know, I was this bloke from Australia that he'd known for a week, but with repetitious action and giving the kid a time of day on many occasions, things start to come out. They start to soften. And then once they start to soften with you, they start to soften with the group. And by the end of camp, they bloody loved this kid. And that was the most beautiful thing for me to see, because essentially this kid that was known as the bully was then the best friend of everyone in the group, because he softened and everyone in camp saw something different in this kid that they'd never seen before. And I think that it's just a, you know, I'm not trying to like toot my own horn here or any way, but I think it's a nice story to share, because oftentimes, like we said, we're so quick to just be judgmental of the perpetrator, when in actual fact, they just probably want just as much love as everyone else, and it might just take more time to draw that out of them.
I'm so grateful that you actually spoke about the perspective of the bully, because for the last, say, half hour or so, we've just been speaking about kind of the victim and the impacts on what you can do. First of all, an unbelievable story. It goes without saying, and that's fantastic to hear that you could have that sort of positive influence on the kids attending the camp. But more specifically, the fact that you were able to even give that kid like an understanding, that ability to feel loved, because oftentimes those who are bullying others are the ones who they have a lot of insecurities. They have a lot of issues that they may be battling with internally. Maybe a broken family, maybe, not as much love and support from home.
Yeah.
And they take it out.
Exactly.
And it's easy to lose empathy for them. It's really easy, because you look at the awful shit that a bully can do and you think, why would I want to have any empathy for them? Fair enough, right? But I think it can go a long way if you want to correct a bully's behaviors, is you want to look at the motivators. And I think you did an excellent job on this camp at doing that. And you were able to really pinpoint and identify that he needs love just like everyone else.
Exactly. I appreciate that, mate. And I think, that experience in itself, and that experience at camp and all of that was a strong motivator for doing something like this, because as people in our 20s, we can have such a strong influence on those younger than us, those in their teens, those in their formative years growing up. So it's just important for anyone listening to realize that you can have that influence on someone that is a complete stranger to you, essentially. So I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to share that story, just to, I guess, give people the hope that, you can be that person. You can have such a strong influence on someone that you might not even know yet. So really, really take note of, your values, and try to project those out into other people, because the influence you can have on others are paramount.
Jeremy, I think your story is probably a pretty good way of wrapping up the potty today. I'm not sure what else I can say on the matter. Definitely, it's one of those topics that it's not easy to confide in people. Other than, confiding in my parents when I did experience it when I was in that year 8 stage, I was never comfortable. I felt too proud to do it. And looking back on it now, telling an extra person may have helped a lot. And that goes for any of our listeners. If you are a listener of this podcast and anything that we said to you kind of struck a nerve with you, our DMs are always open on Instagram. Our emails are always open. And even if you're not currently experiencing any sort of bullying, but you did in the past, and some of these experiences kind of reaffirm to you that your experience would have been unique to you, but it's more common. Again, message us, because it can be it's a serious topic, but I mean, I think there's a lot of things that those who are getting bullied can do, and even so with your story there about understanding what a bully can go through and kind of sometimes the mentality of one. It's a really good way, because I don't think we can, as I said, we can't really phase it out, but at the same time, I think we can manage it. And that's usually the best solution in life, is just to manage things rather than trying to stamp it out, because certain times it's just a lost cause.
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess like the reality is we would love to stamp it out. We would love to stamp out bullying. We would love to stamp out hatred, racism, all of those things. But yeah, like you said, the fact of the matter is, it might unfortunately always be around. So let's focus on how we can overcome it and manage it rather. So yeah.
Awesome, guys. If you've enjoyed, please don't hesitate in rating us 5 stars on Spotify. Chuck us a follow on Instagram, TikTok. What else do we do for social platforms nowadays?
We're on Apple Podcasts
Yeah,
too.
Apple Podcast. So yeah, like, subscribe, rate us 5 stars, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, guys. Bye for now.